Hey, third grade art friends, it's Mrs. Herbay. Welcome to another week of art. We're going to delve a little bit deeper into pattern making this week, and you're going to see kind of where we're going with this project. This is the heart that I sent you home a couple weeks ago, and we're going to talk about how we're going to fill it with pattern. We're not going to do this step this week, but you can see here, I'll try to get it so you can see a reflection of the light. We're going to be carving, not carving, but we're going to be sort of imprinting our patterns into this metal, and it's going to make a really cool relief of our pattern. And eventually we're going to be cutting out the hearts and putting them on a background paper, and then exploring our patterns in color as well. So without further ado, if you would like to grab your pattern worksheet from last week, I'm just going to review a couple things with pattern. If you want to grab a pencil, and we'll get started. All right, guys. So last week we reviewed pattern, or I introduced you to pattern, and I wanted to review it a little bit again because our friends at school, we also were talking about pattern, and some of our friends were having a little bit of trouble kind of grasping the concept. So I just kind of wanted to maybe demonstrate a few more strategies as we think about patterns as well. One thing that people I found at school were doing was they were combining too many different elements sort of in a haphazard way. Meaning, for example, they might just do like something like this and call it a pattern. Now, it might be a nice abstract design, but this is not a pattern, okay? So when you create your patterns, you want to be able to explain it to somebody else so that they could recreate it. So there has to be some type of order to it. It can be random, like you can place shapes randomly in a particular area, but there has to be some rhyme or reason to it. So it's either all of one shape, or it's where maybe you're combining several shapes. So you could do a pattern where you use circles, triangles, and squares, but then you would use those you would use those shapes and repeat those so you see here, you can see that I used those three elements, and although it was random, I was using those three elements, okay? And I was using different sizes of those three elements, okay? Then you can say, well, that looks okay. That's just not super exciting. So then what you can do is you can say, all right, with shapes, what we can do is we can think about dark and light, or shape within a shape, or big and small. So we did some big and small. We varied the size, but maybe we want to make all of the triangles dark. And so we go ahead and do that. And then maybe we want to do, with the circles, we'll do shape within a shape. But we're going to leave the squares alone. That's entirely possible too. Or what we could do is we could make the lines of the squares thicker. So just by making those few little additions, the pattern suddenly becomes more interesting. And it's not that I had to add more elements to it. I can just alter the things that are already there. Okay. Another thing that you could do that we can explore more is the grid. And grids can allow you a myriad of possibilities. So if we have where we do our lines vertically and then we do our lines horizontally. Okay. And then we've created these squares. And like we talked about last week, we could put we can alternate different shapes within the squares. Instead of filling the squares with shapes, we could also fill the squares with lines. So for example, we could put X's inside of the squares. And if I continue to do that, I get kind of an interesting pattern. And I could continue it on down, and then what I could do is, like we did here, maybe I want to make these triangles dark and then the other ones light, and then what it's doing is it's forming this kind of cool geometric pattern. So if someone asked you, hey, that's a really cool pattern, how do you make it? You could say, well, first you draw vertical lines, evenly spaced, then you draw horizontal lines, evenly spaced, and then you put an X inside of the squares. And then you fill in the two triangles on either side of the squares and make them dark. Okay, so that's one option. Instead of putting an X, maybe I do, in this square I do horizontal lines, and in this square I do vertical. And in this one I do horizontal, and this one I do vertical. And so on and so forth. And then I reverse it down here, so now I would do vertical, horizontal, vertical, horizontal, vertical, horizontal. So you can see from a grid, not only can you do shapes within shapes, but you can do lines, different kinds of lines within the squares. So that's kind of another option. Another thing we explored last week was, let's say I just draw, let's say I choose a line, a wavy line, and I'm going to just repeat that line and kind of have it evenly spaced. And then let's say I want to put a shape attached to the lines I just drew. So I'm putting a circle. I'm putting circles kind of on this line as we go down, and it looks kind of cool. And again, I could do, well, maybe half the circle is black, half the circle is white, and then maybe I reverse it on the next one down, and then I keep going like that. Okay. Another thing we talked about also was you can alternate lines. So we talked about that last week, and again, some lines could be dark, filled in. Whoops. So we could fill in, and then maybe I want to put a shape inside that line. And maybe I want to color in the space in between that. And maybe then that kind of sparks an idea. Ooh, I kind of like that wavy line with the circles in it. And maybe I just want to explore that. So as you're experimenting, you can also, some experiments may not work out. You may say, I don't really like that pattern. And that's okay. That's part of the experimental phase of kind of just seeing what works and what doesn't. So here I'm going to, so I had an idea. So if I fill these thinner lines with circles, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, and then maybe I want to color the negative space around those circles. Maybe I want to make that dark and the circles are going to be light. So I can go ahead and do that. But then the cool thing is maybe I want to do something in between in the space that was created between these lines. So maybe it's I take a line and I just kind of go like that. And I think that's kind of cool, and I'm just going to keep doing that. I want to make sure I touch down. I could also experiment with the spacing of those, of the curvy line. Maybe I want it closer together instead of more spread out. So I could try that instead. Or maybe I want it spread out. So this is the part where you can kind of play around with and see what you like, what works, and what doesn't work. So here I'm making those curved lines much closer together to see, do I like that better? And I think it looks cooler. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill in the space in between the circles, and that's going to look kind of cool. I really like that pattern. And again, if someone asked me, well, how did you make that? That looks really interesting. Well, I would say, well, I drew a wavy line, then I drew another wavy line parallel to it, the same distance from it. Then I left a bigger space, and then I drew another wavy line, and then another one that was parallel, same distance. Then I left a bigger space. So you can see here, I alternated my spacing. I filled the space in between those lines with a shape, circles, and then the space in between, and then the other space in between, the larger space, I filled with sort of this really close together sort of curvy line. And then I added some dark and light by coloring in the area in between. Okay, so you can see that there was some organized order to it. I just didn't, I didn't just throw these things together randomly. So what I want you to do is take a few minutes with your worksheet. If you filled up your worksheet, you can just grab a blank sheet of paper and practice some more, because you're going to need about, I don't know, 5 or 6 patterns that you really like when it comes to drawing the patterns onto our heart. So you want to make sure you have some patterns that you like. So play around with and experiment with shapes and with lines, and you have a whole wealth of things up here. I mean, there's you can do anything with any of these patterns. You could play around with even who would think, but you could play around with dashed lines. See what ideas you get from that. Okay. So you even pick some of the kind of the shapes or the lines that you don't necessarily think about. Another cool thing last week we talked about was, let's say you choose a line like, for example, this is sort of the line that we create, that we can create waves with, right? So if I do it like that, right? Well, then if I alternate in between, it makes kind of a cool pattern. Okay. Other lines that we could think about doing that with are curves. So I could kind of stack curves on top of one another, which is kind of, this is kind of reminiscent of fish scales, right? Then maybe you want to add, to make it more interesting, you add another line in there, or not. It just depends. I'm trying to think what else we talked about. But so just so this, hopefully this will inspire you guys and will get you to thinking about the patterns that you would like to create for your for this project. Okay, so take a few minutes, do that, and then I'll explain what our next step is for today. All right, guys, once you finish kind of experimenting around with your patterns, what we're going to do is I want you to grab your piece of paper that has the heart drawn on it. And what I'd like us to do is, what we're going to do is we're going to divide this heart into probably, let's say, five sections, okay? And you might say, well, how are we going to do that? And what I like to do is think about, you can think about drawing like a diagonal line. So kind of what I do is I'll start with like one part. So I'll say, okay, there's one section. So I have one, now I have four more parts. So I could draw a diagonal, I could draw another diagonal line down here. I could kind of come down like this. That could be 2. This could be 3. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. But you guys can divide yours however you want. What you could do is, we could try another way. So one of the ways could be starting with like a diagonal line in the corner. But we probably don't want to draw a line down the middle because we need 5 sections, and that would divide this in half, and then we would only have probably have 4. But what we could do is we could try drawing a line across the bottom like that. So there's one section, right? And then we have this whole top part to divide it into 4 more sections. So maybe we want to do like one there, one there, and one there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And maybe, I don't really like this because it makes that part kind of thin. So you can adjust. You could say, well, maybe this is going to kind of come up like that, and maybe that's just going to kind of go more like that. So now I have one, two, three, four, five. Okay. So you can play around with it, and kind of you can adjust and move your lines around until you get something that you like. You kind of want to have the sections be, I don't know, roughly the same size, give or take. So with this layout, these shapes are about the same. So once you like your layout, then what you're going to do is you're going to look at your worksheet and you're going to say, what are some of my favorite patterns? What are some patterns that really worked out and that I know for sure that I want to put transfer onto my heart? So for example, this pattern that I was working on with you guys earlier, you can find a space that you think would really, one of the shapes that would really lend itself to that pattern. So for example, and you can also decide on the direction. So I think this would be a good horizontal pattern. So I might want to draw it in this part of the heart. So I would start up here, and I'm just going to draw my wavy line. And I'm drawing the line that's next to it, and I'm leaving a bigger space. I'm drawing my wavy line. There's my bigger space, and then I only have room for like another wavy line there. Okay. So that's kind of the start of my pattern. If I see, oh gosh, I don't have quite enough room, what could I do? Well, I could move this up a little bit. If I wanted to fit a little bit more of the pattern. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just make the spacing a little bit closer. And now I have room for one more line. Okay. And then after I get that part in, then I'm going to draw my circles. And then after I get my circles, then I'm going to go ahead and do my curvy line like that. And then I would go back and also then fill in the dark. So that would be my first pattern, okay? Then I was kind of experimenting around with different ways of adding something around the edge of a circle, and I kind of centered on liking this shape that I created, and that's where I just had random circles. So again, I'm gonna see, and I'm thinking maybe this shape here, because it has this little jig in it. So I'm gonna draw some different size circles, but I'm gonna leave some space in between them so I can fit the little decorative edge. And then the decorative edge was made by just doing sort of the wavy line but around the edge. And then I did a shape within a shape within a shape, kind of like that. Okay, so there's that pattern. Then I'm gonna look at some other favorites. Another one that I thought was kind of cool was this one here. And I was playing around with lines that were sort of like this, and I might try it vertically to see how it works out here. So I went like that, then I went like that, and then I went like this. And then I went okay, and that seemed to work out okay. And then I have circles inside. And then I put vertical lines in between. Okay. Another pattern that I liked was this one with the wavy lines and the circles. And again, I can decide, okay, maybe I want to draw the wavy lines coming here. Like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw my circles. And then I also happen to squeeze in another line in between. Okay. And then I need to make half dark, half light. But so you guys get the idea. And then I have one more space where I'll find one more pattern that I like and fill that in. Okay. So go ahead and look at your patterns, see which ones you want to transfer onto your heart. And then after we do that, I'll tell you the final step. All right, guys, I hope you were able to come up with 5 patterns that you really, really love, and that you were able to draw them onto your heart. We're going to stop for today at this point, but next week I will show you how we're going to attach this paper to your medal, and then how I'll show you how you're going to be able to imprint your design, your patterns into this medal to make it look pretty cool. Okay, so have a great week, stay warm, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys on Friday.